Here we go. Fast and loose video that I'm going to be making because it's sweltering out. I'm not going anywhere. You're not going anywhere. The title, and those are my fancy graphics. I think I titled this one 90s Hip Hop, Perfect is the Enemy of Great. I'm going to change your life with this video. As usual, that quote it's stolen a little bit from Voltaire, who says, perfect is the enemy of good, or don't let perfect be the enemy of good. And there's another one by Henri Cartier-Bresson, who's a super famous street photographer from back in the day. Used a Leica, used film, used the Leica lens. And he said sharpness is a bourgeois concept. Bougie for today's terminology, but bourgeois concept. Sharpness is I find that I agree with that aesthetic in that a little rough around the edges is more appealing to me than the super sharp, high contrast photography with all the modern lenses, the super clean, on the grid recordings and mixes. And that is how I'm going to transition a little bit into the I tricked my camera and it's not doing the follow thing. So hopefully we can stick with that. I've had this discussion with a bunch of people, including a bunch on the comments regarding hip hop, and particularly from the 90s, because things have changed. What gave it a lot of that flavor? And we've talked about the Jay Dilla thing. I should show you. Hold on a second. This is a random thing. Look at this. This is a 12-inch promo copy of Young MC, Bust a Move. The regular version is number 1. The instrumental is number 2. On the other side is Got More Rhymes. Same thing. Regular version, then instrumental. And that was co-produced by the Dust Brothers. This was 1988. 1989, they went on to do Paul's Boutique. So I was wandering around yesterday on an errand, and there's a thrift shop nearby, and I popped in because 1, I love thrift shops, and 2, they had a little bit of air conditioning. So I chose to sneak in, get some air, because the air in the streets of New York when it's 90-something with high humidity and it hasn't rained is just something funky. So you got to catch your air conditioning when you can. But this Delicious Vinyl was the label, and distributed through Island Records when they were on East 4th Street, which is unbelievable to me. And the crazy thing is that I looked up the Delicious Vinyl website, and who is all over the Delicious Vinyl website but Jay Dilla? I didn't know that. So Jay Dilla is following me ever since that one video. It's crazy. So let's get back into the perfect is the enemy of good. And I'll try and give you some quick strikes on like why I could say that hip hop in the 90s, and a lot of production in the 90s, there was a certain amount of slop. There was a looseness, and everything was based on how it felt and how it sounded, because we had no visuals to go by. In other words, no waveforms, no screens with grids, no screens with tracks to look at, everything. And you can, if you're down to try it, try and do a session one day, even by yourself, with never looking at the timeline. Just have the mixer up, and your only point of reference will be the counter of the transport. So, lay your beat and start working only from cues. And what I mean by that is, like, we used to write down on a piece of paper, on a yellow pad, typically, write down all your cues. So you'd lay the track and then say to yourself, like, you'd write down, like, at 44 seconds is the first verse. At 1 minute and 10 seconds is the first chorus. So it'd be like 040 1V, 13 whatever, 1C, 157 2V, second verse, and so on. That was your only reference as to where the hell you were at when you were playing and rewinding the tape and locating. So you would, if you wanted to go back to the second verse, you would quickly, on the little keypad, type in 155, especially if you wanted to be like 5 seconds before the punch. So you go 155, enter, or locate, I mean, and then the tape would rewind to 155, and then you would go from there. So all of this was everything by ear and a couple of number references and no visuals, nothing taking your mind away from what you were listening to. And I don't care who you are, if there is something visual in the room, like a timeline, like a bunch of waveforms, your eye is going to be drawn to it, and you're now thinking about a couple of different things. You're thinking about sound, and you're thinking about what you're looking at, as opposed to never seeing the audio, never being able to say, like, oh, punch me in just before that blob there, which we've all heard. So anyway, let's keep going. So the punching, the editing, and that was all affected by lack of visual. So was the sampling. So in other words, the sampling, which was dropping a needle on some vinyl, hitting record on your MPC, and then laying that into your sequence track from a pad. So I've discussed this with a couple of people. There were definitely guys, and this was sort of like a common practice, in that you would sample. So you'd hit record, you would start playing the record, hit record where you wanted to start the sample, and then hit stop where you wanted to stop the sample, obviously. But there was somewhat of a trick that you didn't trim the front of the sample from where you recorded, because that tap, and I hope you can hear that tap, if you did it on the beat, that would be where you would want the sample to start from. So you wouldn't trim it, unless you did, and you just said, like, okay, I'm going to just keep trimming this to the point where, like, it feels like really good on the pad right from as soon as I press the pad. And that was all by ear and by feel. So as you're pressing the pad, you're trimming, you're getting rid of the space. Now, my argument is that, like, in the case of someone like Dilla, I'm not saying definitely Dilla, but there's a good possibility that maybe he didn't trim the top of those samples all that much, and he just let things go in the way they went in as how he sampled them. If you're a real sample head and you can wrap your head around that, I think there's something there. There's a there. So covering that, then there was another guy that asked me in the comments, and by the way, a few of you guys bought me a coffee on Buy Me a Coffee. Thanks a lot. It's one of the reasons why I'm able to stay awake and do another video in the middle of doing everything else in this heat. It's much appreciated. So anyway, this guy asked, like, what compressor would you use on a kick drum? And that is, one guy said, if you had $1 million, what compressor would you use on a kick drum? My answer was, I would use the SSL channel and then pocket the rest of the million. He somewhat appreciated that, I think. You got a laugh out of it. And to that point, I think that, like, if you're reaching for a compressor on a kick drum, particularly a sampled one, it shouldn't really be so devastating. It shouldn't be such a big decision, because you really, in my practice, in my experience, the kick drum doesn't need that much compression, but particularly if it's a sample. Why? It's coming from something that's already been recorded, mixed and mastered, coming from some vinyl that somebody pulled it off of, or even a CD. So there's already a certain amount of processing that has gone on that kick drum to begin with. So now you're kind of touching it again. So there's less and less dynamic range on that kick drum. You're only compressing the dynamic range between the full hits and the lighter hits. Like, you know, compressing, you're going to get a certain sound out of putting a compressor on a kick drum, even if it's zero dynamics. And that's just a flavor thing. I would say if you were going for hip-hop kick drums and you really wanted to capture a little bit of the 90s aesthetic, I would use a little bit of lo-fi distortion, a little bit of Pultec EQ with a little, 60 bump. And then really it comes down to what's going on in the rest of the mix. It's all of the cause and effect of what's causing that kick drum to get crushed probably by low-end information from your bass, whatever element that you're using for that, whatever sub bass and bass, that's going to be taken away from, that's going to be stealing from the impact of your kick, and also low keyboard information. A lot of guys tend to use too much low-end Rhodes or low-end piano, low-end guitar, even if there's all that much. Get the stuff out of the way of the kick drum, and you will find that you don't need to compress the kick drum. Someone just had me listen to a video, a mix, which was accompanied by a video. Some hip-hop guys, I believe from Poland, because of their email thing. And it's great. The stuff sounds great. If I was to say anything, I could hear that a little of the low-end information is somewhat swallowing up the kick drum. So you need to make a little bit of maybe there's like too much low-end on the kick and too much low-end on the bass. And you shouldn't really have too much of both. You got to kind of lean into one or the other. I kind of look at it as, the way to explain it is that some beats or mixes, whether they're hip hop, rock, pop, or whatever, some are driven more by the kick and some are driven more by the bass information. And you have to kind of make that decision. A good example I could give you would be Fleetwood Mac Dreams, which I guess a lot of people have heard. I'm not saying everyone, but my interpretation is that the bass guitar is leading that mix on the low end as opposed to the bass drum. And then there's some Michael Jackson stuff like Billie Jean, where you'll never hear the bass and the kick drum fighting each other because, and I know this from being around Bruce Swedien a little bit, he was big on getting stuff out of the way of each other. So filtering a little of the bass out of the way of the kick drum, filtering a little of the kick drum out of the way of the bass. There's a relationship there that is meant to be played with. I can't believe this turned into a low-end theory situation, but it has. I'm keeping going. Where else did I want to take this one? I am going to continue doing a couple of more in the box demos, so to speak. I'll probably work on something like that over the next week or two. Good news on that tip is that next week it's looking like it's going to be like 100 degrees here in New York City. So there's a good possibility I'll be doing that. I think I've tortured you enough with where we're at. I will say this. I think I'm good on any more RB discussion. And I only refer to him as RB because I'm done with referring to him. Someone else in the comments told me that, oh yeah, he's like, you should check it out. RB took a stab at making a trap beat, like, or a remix of a Drake tune. And I was like, that sounds frightening. And so eventually I had some time yesterday and dug around and I found it, and it was beyond frightening. And that was a good example of perfect being the enemy of good. This guy literally was like theoretically correcting the chord that was going on underneath the Drake track that he was remixing. This is the type of guy that would tell RZA that that sample, those two samples are in different keys, and that's, incorrect. And therein would lie the death of good hip hop. You should check this out, especially the one by the Dust Brothers. Got More Rhymes. Check it out. Give me some comments. It's a, think about it. This was a giveaway. This was a promo copy. This is what they would send to DJs to get their record to the DJ pool. I don't know if you know what that is. I am going to get into the controversial topic soon. Checking my notes here. Someone had asked me about the Worlds Collide comment that I made a while back about studio people, engineers, studio owners, booking studio people, assistant engineers. The clash when the worlds collided with hip hop and the not so hip hop engineers and mixers, and that one's going to be a little dark.